Hello, how's it going? I'm Andy, and welcome back to episode 7 of Scratch Building Basics. On this episode, I'm going to be painting the mini ship that I built in the previous video, and I'll start just by giving it a rust coat, and then I'll come back with my main colour and cover up most of that rust coat but leave the edges exposed. I hope that makes sense, but it should hopefully make sense by the end of this video. So yeah, let's get into it. Alrighty, so I've got my colours laid out here. I've got my burnt umber, my cadmium yellow, and I've got some country maple, and some pomegranate, and then finally some clay. And that's all the colours I'm going to use for my rust coat. And I'm going to use this big scruffy brush. It's just a big flat, wide, scruffy brush. The scruffier the better, really, I find. And then I'm just going to go ahead here and start with the burnt umber and just give it a good coat all over, making sure to get it into all those crevices. And I'm applying the paint by stippling it or dabbing it on, and this just keeps nice texture and stops any brush strokes. So yeah, just continue with my burnt umber, get a good coat all over, and then what I'll do is I'll dry it with a hairdryer. I need to make sure between each coat that the paint's dry, otherwise it'll start getting a bit muddy and the paints will start merging together. So that's my first coat of brown, dry. I can move on to yellow. I've never really used yellow in a rust coat before, but I thought I'd give it a go. Why not? And I'll just load my brush up and then carefully stipple it all over. But just being careful not to cover the brown completely. I do want to make sure that I stipple it on. And just take my time, move around the whole ship. I just want to make sure I hit all the edges and get it into all those crevices, because that's really what's going to be showing the most. Most of this yellow is going to be covered up later on. But yep, just continue, move around the ship, take my time, and don't be loading my brush too much. And just while I have the yellow loaded on my brush here, I'm just going to try dry brushing these thrusters. I'm not really sure what I want to do with them, so I'll just try dry brushing them here with yellow first, just to see how that turns out. And that's the yellow, nicely stippled. And now I can move on down my palette to the country maple, but I'll just clean my brush off first here and just make sure it's nice and scruffy, and then load my brush up with some country maple, and the same again, just carefully dab my way around the ship and making sure not to cover too much and making sure my brush isn't too overloaded. And yep, obviously don't paint this fast, I've sped this up, I am taking my time here. And when I run out of dry places to hold, and obviously in between each coat, I'm making sure to hit it with a hairdryer and making sure each one of those layers of paint is completely dry before I move on. And that's country maple done. And basically the same again, just clean my brush off, make sure it's nice and scruffy. I'm paying more attention to how scruffy it is now the further I get, because I want the sort of stipples to get finer and finer. So yep, I'll just load my brush up here with some pomegranate, and same again, carefully stipple my way around the ship. And there is a few parts here where I put a bit too much on, but it's not the end of the world. I mean, it might matter if you were going to use this for your final finish, but it really doesn't matter, because you're going to cover most of this up anyway. And that's the pomegranate layer done. Once again, I'll clean my brush off here with a bit of kitchen paper and get the brush nice and scruffy. Then I'll load it up with some of the clay and just keep on stippling, just being very careful at this point, especially because I don't want to cover up my previous layers, but always making sure I'm getting into those cracks and crevices, because that's what's going to be showing the most when I'm leaving those exposed on my final layer of paint. And there we go, that's the clay finished. You could stop here if you wanted to, but what I tend to do, especially because you've still got paint left on the palette, I'll go back and just mix up a few different colours and for some variety, and just go back and touch up a few areas that maybe are a bit heavy on one colour or light on another. And yeah, you can be as picky as you want with this part, especially because, like I said, this is all going to be covered up with our last coat of colour. But yep, I'll continue down my palette and drying it each time with the hairdryer, just to make sure I'm not smudging any of those layers. and making sure to hit my edges, especially because they're going to be the most exposed. And yep, work my way down the palette, like I said, use up some more of that extra paint that's left over. I think that's looking good. And like I said, this would make a good paint finish on its own. You could just leave it like this. I think it looks awesome. Just give it some clear coat, or maybe hit it with some weathering powders. But I'm going to hit it with a hairdryer here just to make sure it's dry, and then take some of my holly green, and I'm going to mix it first with some of this yellow and make a lighter base coat, and I'll go around and randomly dab that on onto the panels, avoiding all the edges and all the joins. And this is pretty much the undercoat for my main colour. I'll just be leaving the edge of this exposed. I think it gives it more of a weathered look if you leave like a lighter edge exposed to your main colour. I just want to make sure I avoid my weld lines that I worked so hard to get, and obviously my rivets. There's my rivet there that I did with super glue, and yeah, my rivets I could leave, but I think for this one I'm going to paint them. Normally I highlight them with some metallics at the end, but I think I'll leave them for this one. And because I took my time and did such a good job on the rust coat, it means when it comes to colour I can be as random as I want with the damage, or I could leave whole panels exposed. It really doesn't matter, because I know whatever I leave exposed is going to be a good rust exposure. And yep, so that's the first coat of green, pretty much done. I've left all my edges showing there, and then I'll just go back in with the holly green unmixed and fill that in, but again, like I said, leave the edges of the undercoat exposed. This is definitely one of my favourite parts. It's when it starts to really look like weathered paint. You know, you've got your rusty exposed edges, and then the lighter colour just poking out from underneath the main colour. To me, it really starts to read as weathered paint. It's just awesome. And I just take my time, slowly moving around the ship, using that undercoat as a guideline for my main colour. I'm just being very careful just to paint up to the edge of that undercoat, and just making sure there's a tiny part of it just poking out. And that's the colour done. Looking good. Plenty of edges exposed. I could go back and do a wee bit of damage with some metallics or some black paint, but I think it's perfect just the way it is. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the windshield here and use some metallic for that. This is just some cheap metallic pewter, extreme sheen, of course, and I think this is going to work great just on the windscreen or windshield, depending on where you're from. And then I've got a wee window at the back here, and it'll work well on that too. I'll just hit that with the hairdryer, make sure I don't smudge it or put any fingerprints on it, and then I can move on to the thrusters. And I've got some Santa red here. It's just a nice bright red. I'll use some of that on the thrusters, and then I've got some pure pumpkin. It's a nice bright orange. So I'm gonna attempt a bit of a wet blend here with the thrusters. I'm just gonna do the outside red, and then I'm gonna do the inside yellow, and try to wet blend in between with some of that pure pumpkin. Never tried it before, but I think if it works, it should look well on these thrusters. And then what I'll do is after, I'll try that dry brushing again with the yellow, and hopefully that'll give it a bit of a glow. So I'm going to get a wee bit of a blend going here first with the red and the pumpkin just on the outside, and then I'll hit it with a hairdryer and make sure that's dry. And then I'm going to do the centre with some of that nice bright yellow, and then I'll really just continue to blend it out. I'll put some orange in the outside, maybe a bit more red on, and just keep working at it until it looks right. I'll just clean my brush off here, before I continue to blend with this pure pumpkin. It's getting there, but I'm going to go back in here with some more yellow and just try to blend this out a wee bit more. Like I said, I'm just making this up as I go along. I've watched a lot of those 40k guys, those experts doing this wet blending, but this is my first time trying it. Okay, I think I've got that centre looking the way I want it. I'm going to go back in with some more red here and just brighten up this outside a wee bit. And then go around and do the other two. Okay, thruster's done, and I'm really chuffed with how they turned out. And I just want to go back now and do a bit of a dry brush around them. Just hopefully this will give them a bit of a glow. I tried it at the start on the black, and it did look pretty good. So I'm hoping it'll turn out well over this red. And yeah, that's kind of working how I wanted to. I don't know, I'd considered using white to do this, but I thought yellow was maybe a better choice. I don't know, you can let me know in the comments if you have any better ideas for just giving the thrusters a bit of a glow. So at this point I thought it was done, but then Tim at work on Instagram suggested it needed a bit of a checkered pattern, and he was right. So just painted a bit of a white panel, and then just took a pen, fine liner pen, and drew a checkered pattern on the tail here. I had never used a pen for anything like this before, but I had it in my drawer and I gave it a go, and I think it works really well. I'll definitely be doing it again. And one last step before I give it its clear coat, and that's some brown wash. And this is just made from white spirit and some brown oil paint. I think it's burnt umber brown oil paint. And yep, just mixed together in a bottle. And I'm just going to plaster it all over, just completely cover the whole thing. And the only place I'm going to try and avoid is the very centres of the thrusters. I want to try and keep those bright yellow. But nope, everywhere else gets a really good coat of this brown wash. And then when it's totally plastered, I'm going to go in with some kitchen paper and just dab it off, clean up the windscreen especially there, and go around and clean up everywhere else, soak it up. I just really want it left in the nooks and crannies, really anywhere else that dirt is going to build up, and make sure I leave it on those rust lines. And yeah, that's about it. I think some of it filled up in here, so I need to soak that up and get it out. And yep, leave it overnight to dry, and then it'll be good for some clear coat in the morning. So there you have it, first ship built and painted. I hope this was helpful, and if you have any questions or comments, you know where to go there down below. Work away, no stupid questions here. And I'm on Instagram as well, if you want to give me a shout on there. The address is in the description there. And as always, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.